Hi, and welcome back to my channel, where I'm going to cover the Wizard's Graviturgy Magic class specialization from the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount supplement, providing a brief description of the subclass, as well as explain and set up the various features gained. A Wizard of the Graviturgy class specialization is able to take advantage of things that affect the nature of attractive forces, as well as those that are classified as repulsive forces. This is another form of dunamancy magic, but instead of manipulating time, it's manipulating space, or more appropriately, the gravitational forces that maintain that space. These forces allow a wizard to control the physical space of a battlefield by slowing creatures down or forcing them to move unwillingly, or even pin them in place. As a player, you will get to play around with your character utilizing their magic capabilities before you're forced to choose your arcane tradition at level 2. And this means that you as a player will be able to learn the concepts of magic through using your level 1 character before you have to worry about working out how dunamancy ties into things by the time you hit level 2, provided you've chosen this particular class specialization. To help us out, I've already created a level 1 character here, and all I have to really do is drag and drop our wizard on top of it to apply the appropriate class specialization. And now we can begin to go through our various features. As soon as you've applied your class specialization, your character is going to receive the Adjust Density feature, and it allows your character to adjust the weight of creatures and objects that are within 30 feet of your character. The size of the creature or object that is affected by this feature is of the tiny, small, medium, or large sizes when your character first gains this particular feature. However, when your character reaches level 10, they will also now be able to affect the weight of huge objects or creatures. Your character must also be able to visually see the object or creature in order to be able to apply these forces to that target. And that target does not gain a saving throw in the attempt to resist the effects. They are simply applied immediately. Once applied, the weight of the target will either be halved or doubled depending on which option you have chosen to go with, and it will remain so for a total of 60 seconds, and each type of effect will have a different result. Any creature or object that has its weight halved will be able to move up to an additional 10 feet, double the distance that they can jump, but as a result, they suffer disadvantage on all strength-based saving throws or ability checks. Whereas any creature or object who has had their weight doubled will have their speed reduced by 10 feet and will gain advantage on any strength-based saving throw or ability checks. Now, some of these effects we can actually apply to a particular creature or object through an action effect, so we will want to ensure that these get added to the action tab as part of our overall feature when we go through and drop that into place. And speaking of that, I'm going to do that now. So the first thing I'm going to do is just minimize these so we don't have to worry about them and drop that into place. I'm also going to create a new group called Graviturgy Magic. And I'm going to add in 4 effects. And I'm going to do that partially for preparation, but also to give me a little bit of flexibility here. So the first effect is going to deal with making somebody lighter. I'm calling it Adjust Density Lighter, which means it's going to add 10 feet of movement, and it's going to test their size. So in this particular case, it's if : size all in capital letters, a round bracket, and then a less than or equal to large. So this is going to set it up so that any character we're dealing with, if they are large or smaller, apply disadvantage checks to strength and disadvantage on their saving throw to strength, as well as a concentration factor involved. It's also going to last for 1 minute. I'm then going to do the same thing for making them heavier. So in this case, Adjust Density for heavier, which means we're reducing their speed by 10 feet. We're also checking the same size constraint, and in this particular case, they will have an advantage for their strength checks as well as advantage on their strength-based saving throws. Once again, it lasts for 1 minute. Now, because our character does gain an increase in this capability when they hit level 10, I'm also going to preload those effects. The only change is in the size declaration here. So once again, this is for making somebody lighter. And in this particular case, I'm testing to see if they're huge or smaller. Everything else remains the same. And the same thing comes into play when making them heavier. And again, I am testing against huge or less. So 1 minute, and it can go on a target. Excellent. So we've now got the effects set up. Now, the last thing that I want to do before moving on is finalize the adjustment of the group itself. And that is because I want to ensure that this group is set up to use our intelligence modifier. And that will come into play a little bit later on, so not so much at this particular point in time, but it gets the work out of the way now. So the way this is going to work within combat is going to be relatively easy to deal with. I'm going to attempt to make this vampire lighter. So I'm going to drag and drop that effect onto there. Now I could have targeted the vampire and applied the effect. I'm not too worried about that. It doesn't really matter how the effect gets there. But at this particular point in time, this vampire should suffer any strength-based check or saving throw that is going to be required that they make. There's also a concentration element here, but it's not the vampire that gets to concentrate in this particular case. It's going to be the wizard. So, to prove that, I'm going to temporarily make the vampire the attacker. I'm going to then attack our wizard. This is a hit. I am then going to make my attack roll, and you should see, there we go, a concentration check happen. Excellent. So the concentration check goes whenever the wizard is going to get hit. Now, I'm going to keep doing damage. Well, first I'm going to heal so that my character doesn't die, and then I'm going to keep doing damage until we get a concentration fail. There we go. You can see that the effect has gone away. That is perfect. That's exactly what we want. But returning back to the actual test, we need to ensure that this particular vampire's size, which is medium by the way, is going to be taken into account whenever we force this vampire to make a strength-based check. So all I'm going to do is simulate that simply by asking for a roll. And you can see that 2 of them were rolled. Excellent. We had a 7 here, and it is a red dice, but if you are in fact colorblind, you will notice here that there is a DIS reference. That means that it was rolled with disadvantage. So you can use either of these as cues to tell you that a disadvantage roll was in fact rolled. In addition, you'll see a dropped value here. Let's confirm that it works for the saving throw. Perfect. We know this is now working. Now, what happens if I drop this same effect on the adult white dragon, which, by the way, is a huge dragon? At this particular level, this shouldn't work. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this into place and drop that there. Now I've advanced it so that the adult white dragon goes. And I'm now going to attempt to make a strength-based check here. You can see that only 1 single die was rolled. And whether this was a success or a failure, we don't know because I wasn't testing against any specific condition. All I was doing was checking to make sure that the effect would apply. In this case, it doesn't, which means it's working the way that it needs to. Now, let's assume that our character is level 10 and has now unlocked the ability to affect huge creatures. Well, this dragon just happens to be a huge creature. Now, with the new effect applied, you should see a disadvantage check being rolled. We do here, and same thing for a saving throw. Excellent. Now, does this effect still affect the vampire? Let's confirm that, because it should. I'm going to drag and drop our level 10 equivalent of the effect onto the vampire. Set up our vampire to have the actions that we need to deal with here, and have them roll another check. Excellent. We still see that we have 2 dice being rolled. Now, unfortunately, this is one of the few wizard classes that I am aware of that does not acquire a second feature at level 2. The next feature our character gets is going to happen at wizard level 6, and in this case, you will gain access to the gravity well feature. It will allow your character to forcefully move a given target to a location within 5 feet of where that target started, as long as the space is unoccupied by anything else at the time. When your character casts a spell, and this is going to include anything that is beneficial, harmful, or even utilitarian, all that is required is that an attack roll or a saving throw must be made by that particular target. You will then be able to affect that target by making them move. But this can also occur if that creature is willing to allow the movement, regardless of the type of spell that was cast on them. For example, if you cast Burning Hands on a given target and they failed the saving throw, you would then technically be able to move them 5 feet in any direction as long as the space that they will end up in is unoccupied. Or, if however they succeeded on their saving throw, all that would happen is the usual half damage that the spell would normally apply. They wouldn't be forced to move anywhere. And the same thing comes into play, say, for the Chromatic Orb spell, which requires an attack roll. If you attack with the Chromatic Orb and it hits, you'll be able to affect their movement. But if it misses, obviously you didn't hit them, so you can't affect their movement. Another example would be that if you cast the Dark Vision spell on a particular party member, they don't require a saving throw, nor is there an attack roll for that particular spell. But as long as they are willing, your character will be able to move them 5 feet in any direction, simply because you cast that spell on them. So a good way to look at this is as follows. If you were casting a spell on a willing creature, it doesn't matter what the spell is, you can still adjust their movement or move them to a different location in the sphere of the battlefield. If, however, you're making an attack roll or a saving throw from a spell that you've cast on that particular target, you either must hit them or they must fail their saving throw in order for you to be able to affect their location on that map and push them the 5 feet that you're looking to push them. And once again, under all of those circumstances, the space that they end up in must be unoccupied at the time that they enter that space. As there is no lasting effect that will remain on the target or creature, there's really no effect that we need to apply to them, nor is there a usage indicator here, as we do not need to track any usage counters that require a rest to regain a given use. Thus, we don't need to add this particular feature to our action sheet at all. Now, if you have a dungeon master who wants to ensure that there is a record of use of a particular feature, then you can go ahead and do that by simply dragging and dropping it into place, and then click this little star indicator here to indicate that it got used. If you're going to do that, I would recommend that you drag and drop this into the same group. That way it's all organized and you can easily find it. At Wizard level 10, your character is going to unlock access to the Violent Attraction feature, which allows you to enhance the amount of damage a particular party member can make against a given target. In addition, you can increase the amount of fall damage a particular creature is going to suffer. This feature does have a usage limitation that is equal to your character's intelligence modifier, and will require your character to complete a long rest in order to regain any spent uses. So, for that alone, we're going to have to add this to our Actions tab, but this feature does allow for a few benefits that will still have to also be taken into account. Before I get to that, however, let's go ahead and take care of the usage limiter. Drag and drop that into place, set that up, and in our particular case, we have an intelligence modifier of +4. That means we have a total of 4 uses that we can use for this. So I'm going to set this up and go with 4 usages. Now, of the various effects that are beneficial to us, the first is that if a creature who is within 60 feet of your character and is visible to your character makes an attack that in turn does damage, i.e. you have a party member that has attacked an orc and hit them, your character can use their reaction to increase the amount of damage done so that an extra 1d10 points of damage is added on top of that weapon's normal damage. So if your party member had used a longsword in their attack, in addition to the 1d8 plus their strength modifier that would normally be applied for damage, you could make an effect roll here that would add an additional 1d10 to that attack roll or the damage roll. The second benefit is that if your character can see a given creature that is within 60 feet of where your character stands, and that creature is in the process of suffering fall damage because they have fallen, you will be able to make use of the gravitational pull to increase how much damage they will take by an additional 2d10 points of damage. Once again, this will require your character to make use of a reaction. And as an example of that, let's say that a creature fell 10 feet, and they would normally suffer 1d6 points of fall damage. But if your character used their reaction to affect that fall, then an additional 2d10 points of damage would be able to be applied to the total amount of damage they received. So let's say, for example, that this vampire is in the process of falling. I know they have a flying capability, but I'm not worried about that right now. In that process, what will happen is that, let's say they fell 20 feet. Normally they would suffer 2d6 points of fall damage. Well, 2d6 points of fall damage, in addition to the use of the violent attraction feature here, I'd be able to add in 2 additional damage dice here. So I would just drag and drop that into place on the vampire, although you can't actually do that as a player. There's a better way to do this. The proper way to do that is to add in another effect here that I didn't indicate was here yet, because I wanted to show that as an example. What we have to do is add a new damage effect and simply drag and drop 2d10 of dice here. Now what we can do is, instead of trying to do this and then having the Dungeon Master apply the damage, you can simply drag and drop the die roll directly onto the vampire and have that damage applied directly to that vampire. Now, what about if, let's say, Ape 1 was attacking that vampire? So let's set up their turn to go ahead and function here. I'm going to make my attack roll because I already have them targeted. No, actually I have Ape 2, so let's change that. Let's target the vampire. I'm going to make my attack roll. In that case, it's a miss. But let's say, for example, it's a hit. I'm going to roll this damage. Normally, I would do that right now. But before I do, I'm going to once again use my reaction. Through that, I'm going to apply this effect to Ape 1, and then they can go ahead and roll their damage. You will see that we had a 1d10 that is rolled here. We didn't do a whole lot of damage, but the additional additive of that particular d10 roll here is identified here with this purple dice. Now, what this does mean is that because this is a reaction, you can only use this once per round. Now, I used it twice in this particular round, but that's just simply for the purposes of this example. That's not how it would normally work. You would have to wait a full cycle of the round in order for you to be able to regain your reaction, in order for you to be able to affect the damage that the ape was doing. And finally, at wizard level 14, your character is going to gain their last feature through the use of this particular class specialization, and it is called Event Horizon. It allows your character to severely impact the ability of hostile creatures to move around your character. Any hostile creature that starts their turn within 30 feet of your character must make a strength-based saving throw. If they fail that saving throw, they will suffer 2d10 points of force damage, as well as have their movement speed reduced to 0 until the start of their next turn. On a successful save, they will only suffer half damage. However, their movement speed will still be affected, but slightly differently. In this case, for every 1 foot of distance they cover, it will cost them 2 additional feet of movement, meaning that their movement speed will be reduced to 1/3 of their normal movement speed, rounding down. So if a creature has a normal movement speed of 30, then they would only be able to cover 10 feet of distance during their normal movement round, and a total of 20 if they chose to dash. Whereas a creature that has 20 feet of normal movement will only be able to move 6 feet of their normal movement, or a total of 12 if they chose to dash. The effect field itself will remain in place for a total of 60 seconds, or until your character's concentration has been broken. And every single turn that a creature starts their turn within that area of effect, they will be required to re-roll their saving throw. This feature does have a condition on the number of times that it can be used. You will gain 1 free use, in the sense that you get to use this once before having to complete a long rest, but at the same time, you also can burn through a 3rd level or higher spell slot to be able to make use of it again. However, you must have already used your free use in order to do that. Now, because there are 2 modes of use that can come into play, there are going to be 2 ways that we can set this up. I'm going to set up our free use first. And we can see here that everything is pretty much ready to go. We just have to pop this open so that the DC check for that saving throw is updated to take into account the aspects of the group rolls. And then we simply modify this to have 1 daily use. So that takes care of setting up that aspect of it. Now what I'm going to go and do is set up an actual spell for this. Now, unfortunately, you can't simply just drag and drop this into a particular spell group and have it work. What you need to do is take a level 3 or equivalent spell and drop it into place. I am then going to rename this particular spell to Event Horizon. I am also then going to adjust this to take into account the same effects that we have here. So we can get rid of this particular effect here. Oops. That. I'm going to keep this and just simply update that. And then I'm going to add in a damage effect. The first one I'm going to deal with is the damage effect. I'm going to simply take 2d10 of dice here and simply drop force there for the type. I am then going to modify this so that it becomes a strength-based check as opposed to a wisdom-based check. Oops, went right by it. There we go. Now we've essentially recreated this as a spell that requires a level 3 spell slot or higher to be able to cast. That's perfect. That's what we want. Now, the last thing that I want to do is provide an indicator that a particular creature is in fact in that area of effect. So through that, I'm going to create a simple effect. And all it's going to be called is event horizon. It's going to last for 1 minute, and it's going to require a concentration check. And here's why I'm setting it up this way. If I take this particular wizard and I target the vampire, the apes, the specter, mind flayer, and adult white dragon, I can cast this particular effect on all of those at the same time if I need to, but that's not what I'm looking to do. What I'm looking to do is apply this effect to all of those particular creatures. Now, if this vampire happens to target and attack my particular character here, let's see, I'm going to make that attack roll. That is going to be a hit. What's going to happen is that there's going to be a concentration check that is made. And if I fail, that field will drop. So I'm going to roll damage again to see if we can get a failure. Come on. Really? There we go. Now you can see that the effect has dropped from all of those particular creatures. So it's going to deal with two things. One, it's going to tell you exactly who is within that 30-foot reach of your character. Two, it's going to take care of dealing with the effect as long as that effect can be applied. Now, any creature that moves out of that particular area of effect and then comes back while it's still up will have to have a slightly adjusted duration associated with that particular effect, but otherwise you just simply apply it. Now, how do I tell whether that effect is actually physically up? The way that I can do that is by adding another effect to our own character. Actually having a thought about that, all I really have to do is apply that same spell, or effect rather, to our own character. Now that I just realized that, duh. But anyway, this won't go away until your concentration is broken. So when this goes down, everything goes down. Your character would not be affected. Only all of the hostile creatures that had this target applied to them, or the effect applied to them, would be affected by the actual damage and requirement for the saving throws and things like that. So now let's go ahead and deal with what happens when dealing with the actual strength-based check, as well as the damage and their movement. So as we can see here, it is now Ape 1's turn. Now what I can do is, let's say that they're done their turn. I can move this onto this particular creature's action token. When I do that, I as a wizard have to pay attention to this effect here. As long as that effect is there, I then have to make them roll a strength-based saving throw. Now, even though I have all of these other targets targeted, this is the only one I wanted it to actually deal with. So that's the reason why I dragged and dropped it, as opposed to just untargeting everything and clicking that roll. Now what I got to do is apply the damage to that particular creature. At the same time, they can't move, but there's no indicator in any of these effects that that is actually happening. We now have to add in an incapacitation capability here, or effect. Actually, a correction on that, they aren't incapacitated because they still have the ability to do things. They just can't move. That is the only limitation. So their speed is reduced to 0. There really isn't an effect that we can apply that deals with that just yet. I'm hoping that Fantasy Grounds finds a way to add that, but right now there isn't one. Now, you will notice as well that there is this half declaration here. Let's see if we can get this ape to actually succeed on their saving throw. Or actually, let's do it for all of them. So we have a number of them that succeeded and failed. Now, if I apply the damage, it's going to roll once and then apply that damage to all of them. And anyone that actually made their saving throw will only suffer half of the damage. So you can see here that these two only suffered half. Excellent. That means that the saving throw aspect of it is working. So now that I think about this, other than copying over this effect onto the spell, there's nothing else that we have to really do in relation to this particular feature. So I'm going to add in a new effect. Modify this to also be event horizon. semicolon and square bracket C for 1 minute. And now we've got the ability to make use of this as a feature or as a spell. Now, I love this overall concept of the Side of Dunamancy, and it will be far less disruptive than the Chronergy Wizard will be, and it still provides a massive amount of crowd control over a given battlefield. It also allows for the use of the environment to help hinder hostile creatures or even benefit the party in some way, shape, or form. The Event Horizon feature is even more potent because it can directly affect a large number of creatures in a 30-foot sphere around that character, controlling a much larger portion of that battlefield, thus making this wizard a very competent wizard to have in your party. However, this does bring us to the end of this particular video. I hope you found it useful and informative, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.